Hi, is this working? Yeah. I'm Alan Gostrop from the British Asian Trust. So we're a bridge between the South Asian diaspora here and partners on the ground in India, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. It's two questions for you, Safina, if that's okay. So you talked quite a lot about getting girls into education, which is obviously really important. I'm quite interested in the experience of children who are in school already and what it changes for them in terms of their outcomes. And then the second thing is, I'm guessing lots of people are going to be coming to you and trying to invest in you in future DIBs. And I guess my question is, if they come along and they're looking for different outcomes, does that make your job a complete nightmare?
Very, very great question. Am I? Yeah.
Yes.
First of all, like I said, the enrollment. Although I did hop on more examples around enrollment, but 80% of the weightage is on learning, and the learning is gender neutral. So it's boys and girls in third, fourth, and fifth, because both boys and girls, their learning outcomes are leave a lot to be desired. Let's say. So that's on the learning. So it's not just enrollment is 20% and learning for both boys and girls is 80%. And the second question being, yes, so if somebody else comes along and says, now we want you to do this outcome, we would actually probably say no. And that's because our entire model is based on the two Millennium Development Goals, now the Sustainable Development Goals. One being that there are still 57 million children out of school, majority girls, and bringing them back. So that's the reason that we signed up for that outcome, because that's the outcome we deliver to. And the second is the 250 million children in school and not learning. So, and that's what my model can actually deliver. So to create bespoke outcomes, we wouldn't do it. If it was a common measurement framework outcome like the SDGs that was appropriate to our work, then we would.
A question from our online audience to Phyllis. Could you explain a little further who carries exactly what risk and how this is contractually fixed between all parties involved?
Sure. I'm not going to go into the details of the contracting because you'll all be snoring and it'll take hours. But I will talk about the risk. So the way it works is that there is an investor who is assuming the majority of the financial risk, okay? Because we're putting money into the implementing organization who is delivering results, hopefully. Now, what risk does the implementer have? The implementer has some serious potential reputational risk, because as I said in my presentation, there is no place to hide. It's extremely transparent, and if they don't deliver, people will know about it. And that is motivational for implementers, but also frightening. The outcome payer bears no risk, which is why they have to pay more, because they're paying only if results are achieved. And so they pay a premium not to bear that risk of anywhere between 7 to 15%. And we could debate whether that is the right amount. But frankly, I don't think there's anybody who knows how to actually value the risk that's being taken. And that's one of the things that we still need to learn. Is 15% too little even? Because anything can happen in these contexts. We know that these are really challenging places to work. So that's who bears the risk. In terms of contracting, there's a number of ways that we can do this. So you can either structure this with a special purpose vehicle. You could structure it as debt. You could open up a Cayman fund. You could structure it as equity. We kept this one very, very simple. And it's basically a grant that we're giving, and we're being given a grant then by Children's Investment Fund Foundation, who's the outcome payer. How you structure this is also important for risk, because you want to mitigate third-party payment risk. Okay, two kinds of risk here primarily. There's third-party payment risk and there's performance risk. Third-party payment risk is that what if Children's Investment Fund Foundation decides that they don't want to do this anymore and they're not going to pay us? That's a real risk. So there's ways to mitigate that by putting the money into a separate fund, and then performance risk we already talked about.
Great, thanks. Questions from the floor? This lady here.
Hi, I'm Katie from Oxfam, and we are just about to produce a concept note for a development impact bond, which is replicating one of our programs in Tajikistan. We've had initial conversations, quite early stage. There's people who are saying we'd love to, we're really interested to watch to see what happens here because there's so few examples. Safina, yours sounds amazing. It's really exciting to hear about. My question is to either Donald or maybe Phyllis or anyone really, but talking about the size of the investment that your DIB is taking on, there's been sort of contrasting expressions of whether investors feel that it's a greater risk to them because it's a DIB, but is actually for some people too small an investment, make it not that attractive, or because it's maybe slightly riskier and quite a new product, does it mean that a smaller size investment is actually more appealing to investors in this space? I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Donald?
This sounds like a question for Phyllis, actually, in terms of the landscape of potential investors.
Okay, so this DIB is small because it was a proof of concept. It's too small. I wouldn't do a DIB of this size. If you're looking at creating a really scalable structure, these things have to get much bigger. They're way too small. So we need to be looking at DIBs that are minimum of 10 million. They really are not designed for small investments, which is why I go back to the point I made about this is not this is not capital putting to fund a risky initiative. This is really to scale something. And hopefully they'll grow even bigger because capital markets don't wake up for anything less than several hundred million. So 10 million is a start.
Right. Lady back there.
Hi, I'm Aurélie from the Cabinet Office in the Center for SIBS team. So yeah, I know a bit about SIBS. When I first heard about them, I was like you, Belinda. I was like, wow, this is amazing. It's going to solve every problem. But then I've heard one of the biggest concerns about SIBS and DIBs is that, like, just to quote Phyllis, it might make rich people richer on the back of poor people. So beyond a greater social impact for the service provider, how, if it is the financial return shared with the NGO? I know Paddy mentioned a performance bonus for Educate Girl, and I would like to know more about that.
Safina?
Yeah, so in this particular transaction, the performance bonus is shared with the NGO. So which also incentivizes my field staff. So if we, it's not just, okay, 10 girls in, job done, let's go back. It's you keep working right till the end. And then if the investor makes money, then we get a share in it too.
Paddy?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is just a very context-specific thing. You've got to look at what the right incentive structure is for the service provider, and that has to be designed in situ. I mean, I don't think there's many general answers here, but I mean, contract theory says that high-powered incentives, really saying you only get paid for results and you get zero otherwise, is usually a bad idea from the service provider's point of view. So this is the whole point of this structure, really. Yeah.
Thanks. Lady in the front here.
Thanks. I'm Patricia Hamzai with Integrity Capital. About 2 weeks ago, I attended the Responsible Investment Europe conference where there was a room full of asset owners and asset managers. One of the questions that was asked was, would the SDGs, be investable? Does it give a platform for new investors, institutional money to come into this space? And the room shook its head. 17 were just too many. It was not going to be possible. And I was just wondering whether or not DIBS provides the vehicle, because they said four sort of investable activities would be manageable. Would DIBS could an instrument be created that could provide that kind of focus to make it more attractive to institutional money?
Paddy?
I mean, we've got this problem of scale, which is that everybody's starting really small, and you need to get up to 10 million, and then suddenly people are talking about trillions over here. So I guess if I was a load of putting myself in the shoes of private investors, I might be looking at really big infrastructure projects somewhere if I wanted to move a lot of money. Is your question more about whether private investors are able to, if there's 17 goals, how many of those can be turned into investable?
Yeah, because most of them are related, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think when you look at Educate Girls, that educate girls, their outcomes, what you're trying to tackle have many strands to them, in terms of attainment and then future outcomes and employability and all of those things. So you can sort of group some of the SDGs in some way, and then it would a DIB structure kind of be able to do that for you, so that you reduce that 17 down to a more manageable number.
So I guess it comes down to whether you've got suitable outcomes to measure. I mean, it's already been mentioned that it might be tricky to tackle a human rights SDG with some sort of measurable result. But I mean, definitely, this kind of structure does move into the more social and the more behavioural. It is growing the pot, if you like, of sectors that can be investable. Yeah.
This gentleman here.
Hi, I'm Sharath from STIR Education. We motivate teachers in public education systems, also work in India and Uganda. Just a question really about the way the DIB is structured. I completely agree with Safina about ultimately want public money, especially in a country like India, to fund this as the outcome pair. And I think there's a real risk, if we're not careful, that governments take even less responsibility. So we work a lot with government structures, we work with officials. Is there a way to create an incentive for the government as well? So, for example, Rajasthan gets an extra bonus from the National Ministry in India if that works well. So the idea being the government is part of the success, not an external passive party. Any thoughts on that?
Safina?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, I should clarify, this particular model is where the government is having its hardest time delivering, where the execution gap is the widest. And it's in partnership with the government. So there is no parallel delivery system to kind of let the public education system die while you run your own schools or anything. It's really, the MOU is with the government to actually go into the worst areas and support the government to make, to reduce that gap in those places. So I completely agree. It has to be, and also the alignment of it. I mean, the government has signed on to the SDGs. So there's a direct alignment between what I want to do, where I need to do it for which child, and where the government's responsibility also is. So you're actually, as a player, accelerating the government's goal, towards that. Yeah. So totally, I don't think it works. And also, if I show success, that's a government success. If I do well, it means the government has actually done well in that area. So you have to, and it's absolutely critical for alignment to do that.
Lady over there.
Hi, Sheila Whitley, also with the Overseas Development Institute. I'm actually sort of building on the last question in that actually, if you're not very closely tied with the government, I imagine the government can also be a disruptor in these cases where the government puts in a policy or a program that provides the service that the other, that the DIBS provider at the service providers is taking on. And I think that happened in the UK. So how do you deal with that contractually? And a second question, just because I was building on the last one, is given the number of private actors involved in an intermediary role, how do you actually enable learning? Because I imagine a lot of this becomes commercially confidential. So what are the ways in which you can share contract structures and documentation given the types of actors involved in this space?
Yeah.
Oh, do you want to start?
Yeah, so I'll start. So I think one of the main pieces around this particular transaction, I'm really grateful we had the most amazing partners, was to put everything in the public domain. And so educategirlsdib.org is where you will find everything from even the design memo is public. So anybody else who wants to run with it, they can, and they can kind of use all the learnings that we've sort of. And also, I think UBS brought on board. Phyllis, do you want to talk about the role of Dahlberg as?
Yes, so we've also brought somebody on board to help make public all of the lessons that we've learned and lay out for the public domain how we develop this. And that was part of this DIB from the very beginning. Because this is a proof of concept, we want to be able to share all of these results. So as we progress, we'll share everything that we've got.
Okay. Lady here.
Hi, I'm Suzanne Beagle, and I run an organization called Women Effect, which is a network of philanthropists and investors focused on positive women and girls impact. And our investors and philanthropists are asking the question, how can I invest today to positively affect girls? And how can I use my philanthropy to tee up investable things later? And so you both alluded to it, Phyllis and Safina. what is the role of philanthropy leading to something becoming investable? And how do we explain that to philanthropists, what role that plays, how they can use their philanthropic capital? And then do you think when this is successful, that there will be things that will go beyond the grant structure, Phyllis, that you talked about, and really be something which is an investment vehicle that investors who want to have a positive girl impact can participate in?
So the first part of that question was, what can philanthropists do now to create more of these investable structures? What they can do is help build this sector. So they can help organizations who have the potential to be dibbable, I would say, but don't have the data right now. So they can fund the evidence building of organizations so that they know whether or not they can really deliver this. They can help organizations put in the management information systems they need to drive and manage performance. That is a great role for philanthropy. And how do we create these vehicles so that they're truly investable vehicles? We need more of them, and we need bigger ones. So it only becomes financially realistic at about the 10 million range, because the cost of developing these have to be passed on, and you can't do that when it's a small dib.
Gentleman at the front here.
François de Borgrave from Coes Invest. We're actually now developing a 35 million humanitarian impact bond with the International Committee of the Red Cross in Geneva to build rehabilitation centers for people with disabilities in post-conflict countries. On the question of investors, I mean, we talked about size that needed to be large enough for investors to come in, but what other elements do you see as important for traditional investors to consider this as, let's say, a regular casher investment proposition? Because if we want to drive large amounts into this space, I mean, we cannot count only on people with social motivation to invest.
Is that for me? Okay. Okay, so size is one thing. You need the return to be commensurate with the risk. So, figuring that out is a challenge. But again, somewhere between 7 to 15%, or maybe it's slightly more than 15%. You're working in some of the most complex situations, so it may be more than 15%. Third-party risk. Who's the outcome payer, and where is that money coming? If it's coming from a government, what happens if there's a change in leadership? So that has to be managed. And performance risk. How do you know that these facilities will be built? Where is there evidence that this has been done successfully before? Because if this is the first time this is being tried, then 15% is not going to be enough. So this, there needs to be some evidence that this has worked in a similar context.
I'm going to take two more questions from the floor, and then I'm going to ask the panelists just to do a quick 2-minute sum up on DIBS. Gentleman in the second row here.
Thank you. I'm Kulraj, and I'm from World Vision UK, and we are also in the process of developing a DIB around education. I just wanted to ask one question in terms of the size. Definitely 10 million, if you're suggesting, should be the minimum. I mean, there is a lot of effort that we particularly feel that in terms of developing the DIB, in terms of the modeling work, which we have found that it's quite expensive. So how do you suggest in terms of, from your experience, how you try to build that cost in the existing DIB returns, or what do you do?
It's you again, Phyllis.
Come on. These guys have access to these great thinkers. You can do it a number of ways. Because this was, again, a proof of concept, we absorbed the cost. But ideally, as in any investable product, those should be spread out to the investors. So the return has to be high enough to compensate for those costs. So it's very hard to spread out those costs when you're looking at a small investment. But ideally, that's how you would do it. Or maybe you've got one, if this is philanthropy, maybe there's one philanthropic donor. Maybe one of Susan's philanthropic donors wants to come in, and that's how they can make a contribution. They can fund those transaction costs.
The final question here is the gentleman in the front.
Thank you. I'm Robin Horn from Children's Investment Fund Foundation. We're the outcome funder. Very happy to be part of this. One is a point I'd like to make is that, as Phyllis said in the beginning, this particular DIB is a proof of concept DIB, and we're all learning about how DIBs could work, in particular the challenge of working in contexts where the initial data is less solid than it would be in SIBs in UK, US, and other countries. So this has been a tremendous learning experience, and as Phyllis was saying, we're sharing all this information. I think it's fantastic for all parties interested in DIBs going forward. We're also sharing some of the risks because of the incomplete information at outset, and also because as we're saying, this is something for us all to learn and share information with everybody. Now, I have a question for Donald and Patty, which is about the expectations about other types of outcome funders. In particular, SIF, my organization, is not a traditional outcome funder. We're usually a grantor. We provide grants to organizations like Safina's organization and manage them pretty closely. So in this particular DIB, we're kind of taking an experimental position, but I think if we're looking at the future of funders, outcome funders, really one of the tremendous potential types of outcome funders is the multilateral and bilateral actors, whether it's the World Bank, which just raised another $70 billion and probably more for IDA, DFID, USAID, all of the huge amount of funding that right now goes into these contexts where there is limited information and huge challenges for getting the kinds of results that we care about and that the SDGs have recently been highlighting. So the question is, what do you think that there is a possibility of these types of multilateral, bilateral funders really stepping forward and being outcome funders, outcome payers in contexts that we're all here because we care about?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Paddy.
Well, I raised the possibility that DIBs allow the donor to say, hey, we only pay for success without loading all that risk onto the service provider. So I guess it all depends on how attractive that is to these big ones, the bilaterals and the multilaterals. And you know, I don't really understand how bilateral donors work, but I imagine that actually politically it's very palatable to be able to say, look, our big aid fund program really only pays for things that work. That's going to play well with the newspapers, I guess. So the bilaterals, maybe this is a great thing for them. The World Bank, maybe they're a little bit more capable of taking a bit of failure on their own backs, and maybe they'll look at the value for money, and maybe they'll take a different view on it. But I'm kind of speculating a bit there. I don't know.
Well,
sure. Yeah. So we're actually we've been as part of the kind of the landscape of DIBs. We've been doing some scoping work for a potential DIB in Uganda, looking at sleeping sickness in cattle sort of laying the groundwork and doing sort of picking up some of those costs that we were discussing earlier about scoping environments in which outcome funding might be amenable, and also just to learn about how these processes could play out. I mean, I think that the key question for any outcome funder is going to be, how does this particular instrument in this particular context compared to the other instruments that are available to us. And looking at our payment by results strategy, we're seeing DIBs as part of that kind of world. Very much the kind of the first sentence of the Secretary of State's foreword is about driving value for money. So I guess the key question for us as donor, couldn't speak for other bilaterals or multilaterals, would be, as the evidence base builds and as these pilots emerge, how is it looking as a potential instrument to deliver outcomes from a value for money perspective compared to the other instruments that are available to us. obviously it's very early days, and we're very keen to kind of hear learnings and share learnings to kind of help get to the point where we can make those kind of decisions.
Great, thanks very much. So just ask the panel for quickly, in a minute each, I'm sorry to really cut you on time here, but we're running out of time, to just say, DIBS, what role do you think realistically they're going to play in the future? Paddy?
So I'm going to go back to say that for now we're just looking at experimentation and trying to scale it and seeing how things work. And I just want to kind of maybe say one thing, which is that I've been thinking all about kind of cost effectiveness and why this particular structure might be more efficient than others. But I just want to say that I'm still impressed by what it's actually doing. I mean, forgetting the kind of money side, it sounds like there's been things happening, kids getting in school and getting educated, and if we see more results like this, then hopefully there's a really bright future for DIBS ahead of us.
Great, thank you. Phyllis?
Great. 2 years ago, I sat on a panel where I described DIBS as the unicorn. Everybody's talking about them, but nobody's actually seen one. 2 years later, there's still only 2. So I don't think that DIBS need to look like your 4-year-old's football match, but I do hope that we can see more people moving into the space, more philanthropists developing this space, because I think it is essential that we develop new financing mechanisms to fill this gap, which is big, but is going to get even bigger.
Thank you. Safina?
I think DIBS, for me, play, to make sure that more and more children will actually get educated. And we know that it will happen. It's not that, Educate Girls is very good at fundraising, so we keep raising money and we have absolutely zero impact on the ground. This really, to hold us accountable for delivering what we promised to deliver, I feel that that's really important and is a big part of the reason that we do this. And also, I think on the funding side, instead of just doing really expensive pilots and not knowing where that leads it, really using that money much more efficiently. Again, for those children, they're waiting. Each year that we kind of, don't deliver is a year of their future that just dims a little bit. So I think accelerating it, I think scaling it, but I think doing it with razor sharp accountability and focus to those children is really our job. And I think DIB is a mechanism that can allow us to do that.
Thank you. Donald?
I think for us, we just need to be constantly improving the ways that we can meet the Sustainable Development Goals and the ways that we can contribute to those improvements to children who are in inadequate schools, who can't get access to schools, and all the rest of it. The degree to which DIBS can contribute to that, let's learn as best we can, which parts of DIBS might be successful, which parts of DIBS might push that agenda forward. Watch this space. It's going to be exciting to see what happens.
Great, good. Well, thank you very much. Thank you all for coming today. Thank you to our online audience as well. I hope you found the discussion interesting and stimulating, and you're going to go wherever to continue talking about it. Thank you very much to Paddy Carter, Donald Menzies, Safina Hussain, and Phyllis Costanza. And we are now serving coffee in the other room. Thank you very much, everyone.